Hello, my dear friends, and welcome to another episode of Europa Rediviva. This should have been a Substack post, but because of a malfunction on the platform, I lost the whole text, so now you have the courtesy of hearing it spoken out in English for the foreign audience on my channel. So, today Valery Zaluzhny made a comment that was very shocking for Western audiences. He said that in a meeting of Ukrainian ambassadors in Kiev, he said that NATO military doctrines are so obsolete, they are stuck in the Second World War paradigm, that it would take 12 years from the moment when they began switching to some which would be more compatible with the Russian ones, to reach the Russian level of military prowess. So essentially, not only did he say that Russian military is far superior to NATO's, but he said it's a structural problem. The cause is in the doctrine, and that NATO has its military doctrines stuck in the Second World War. Now, Zaluzhny is not exactly a Putin puppet. He's the former chief of the Ukrainian army and the current ambassador of Ukraine to London. So you can imagine, he's quite a hawkish element. He's very close to the far-right nationalists from Western Ukraine. He was seen sporting these neo-nationalist symbols on his military uniform and on his bracelet when he was in charge of the Ukrainian army. So he's not exactly an appeaser. He's quite a hawk, quite a hardliner. So if he says this, if this comes from him, he also said to have worked for more than a decade in bringing the Ukrainian army up to NATO standards. So therefore he knows the NATO standards very well. And if he says these things, they're probably true. So for me, they don't come as a shock because, like everybody who has listened to analysts like Andrei Martyanov, for example, various American analysts like Daniel Davis, like Scott Ritter, Larry Johnson, these things are not new. So the United States military doctrine is one that's suitable for fighting small countries that cannot fight back, but it's not suitable for fighting against peer competitors. And it is still stuck in the World War II paradigm with military expeditionary forces. And so the question is, what is the consequence of this? Valery Zaluzhny says that it no longer makes sense to try to join NATO from a military point of view, because NATO doesn't have much to bring in terms of military organization. Of course, NATO can bring in resources, but I think he also dropped the belief that NATO will at any moment jump in to Ukraine's rescue and join the war against Russia. So Valery Zaluzhny says that he would like to focus Ukraine's integration into a European military alliance, perhaps one that's started from scratch. And of course, it would be one that would have Ukraine at the forefront, also because it is the only European country besides Russia that is an active war participant, and therefore that knows what works and what doesn't nowadays. So this is what Ukraine is now aiming for, to somehow bring the European continent together into a military alliance spearheaded by Ukraine, led by Ukraine, where Ukrainian military tactics would be employed. And this has some pretty big consequences for Romania. This is what I wanted to touch upon on my Substack post that I do in Romanian. But I will explain in English, because I think it's even more relevant for the foreign audience. The Romanians are not very astute in realizing what's going on and what role they play with respect to Ukraine. And I think it's easier to see by the international audiences Just like it is easier for me to see it from abroad than um, to have seen it if I was living in Romania, and if I was basically indoctrinated with all of these um, propaganda tropes about Ukraine's impending victory, about about Russia's weakness, about Russia's collapse, and so on. So Romania stands apart from all the countries on the western flank, as they are called, so on the western NATO flank, because it doesn't have sentience, it doesn't have autonomy, but this lack of autonomy comes from its self-perception. So whereas a country like Poland wants to be a bulwark of the West against Russia, but at the same time is not suicidal and wants to put its national interest first, a country like Romania doesn't perceive itself as being worthy of pursuing national interest, and it cannot even formulate it. It does not even tolerate rhetoric that is in line with some sort of formulation of a national interest. And because of this, it is very, very, it is a very, very good candidate to be used by other countries, and it is being used as we speak. In the context of the Ukraine war, Ukraine has launched a very successful information operation in the Romanian media and in the Romanian political space, in the fact that Romanian media outlets not only prohibit themselves from consulting the Russian sources, because this is also banned at the European Union level, but they also have no analysts that understand the nature of the conflict to any degree, and the only thing that they do is they translate propaganda pieces from Ukrainian media. Now, of course, Ukrainian media publishes propaganda because this is the nature of a country at war. Every country at war publishes articles that are favorable to the war cause. So it's not like I'm saying anything controversial here. And the Romanian public has been fed for the past 4.5 years with all of these narratives that are too ridiculous to be taken seriously by anybody who is at least marginally acquainted with the conflict. But for some reason, the Romanian public is gullible enough that they actually believe them. All of these stories with the ghost of Kiev, with grandma that that downed Russian drones with pickle jars, the Russians eating each other on the front lines, practicing cannibalism because of starvation, fighting with shovels, all these idiotic things. There is quite a large public in Romania that believes them because this is the only thing that they hear. A large part of the Romanian public doesn't believe what they hear, but they also don't have an alternative. So basically, they believe nothing, or they just ignore the topic altogether. And the people who claim to be informed about the nature of the conflict are informed by the most unhinged propaganda pieces of the Ukraine regime, which are translated into Romanian and which are published in mainstream media outlets. What is more, Ukraine even sent Romanian speakers to infiltrate Romanian news organizations and to write, of course, articles as subject matter experts on Ukraine, to write articles, of course, praising the leadership of Ukraine and presenting everything from the point of view of Ukraine and from the point of view of Ukraine's national interest. And not only is there no counter-narrative with respect to what Romania should require, what Romania should request, what Romania needs from the standpoint of its own national interest, but such people who try to formulate such narratives are completely demonized, and they are scolded by the mainstream media. Some mainstream media outlets have a permanent rubric with the conspiracy theorists on the Romanian social networks, and they shame them publicly. They shame all sorts of private persons who are not involved in politics, who are not journalists, who just express their opinions on Facebook, and they are publicly ridiculed with links towards their profiles, so as to shame them into submission, into no longer sowing dissent and no longer doubting the narratives. And because Romania has this problem that it cannot formulate and follow its national interest, it somehow fell into the trap, the majority of the population fell into the trap of electing people and believing sources which are completely servile to foreign powers. And this is somehow said to be in Romania's national interest because Romania's national interest needs to be pro-Western. The logical fallacy of this type, but because the educational level in Romania is so low, then it is somehow believed. So Romanians are being convinced to hand over their resources, to go into debt, to do all sorts of suicidal things, because this is somehow helping some Western parties, some Western corporations, some Western nations, and therefore it is pro-Western, and if it is pro-Western, it is good. It's absolutely retarded, but this is the level in Romania right now, so... And this will have consequences, because any kind of domestic political force is being criminally investigated and will probably be criminally convicted pretty soon. Just like any domestic political force that has Romania's national interest at heart is not allowed to stand in the elections, the only possible consequence of these things is that Romania will follow through to the last consequences of its stance as a tool for other countries. And the best candidate is Ukraine, of course, because Ukraine has infiltrated part of the Romanian political spectrum with its agents. It's a very visible operation. Those people just blurt out the point of view of Ukraine, even when it contradicts the national point of view, even when it contradicts the official position of the Romanian authorities, and when it goes against national interest. Like, for example, when there was that drone that exploded in Constanța harbor, the Ukrainian drone. These people said, the Ukrainian agents in Romania that are also members of Romanian political parties in government, these people said that we were asking for it because we were transporting oil from a Russian port, and in the end Ukraine bombed that route and bombed the pipeline through which Romania was getting oil from Kazakhstan to refine. And as a consequence of this, we will have fuel shortages in a few months, in a few weeks perhaps. So essentially there are these agents of Ukraine that have a lot of traction in Romanian society, and their points of view are seen as somehow virtuous and semi-official, so they are regarded as authoritative, even though they just churn out the point of view of Ukraine, what Ukraine wants from Romania, not the absolute truth, but what is in Ukraine's favor with respect to Romania. And of course, this will have as a consequence a further subjugation of Romania, and Romania will be used more and more to the interests of Ukraine. And because Ukraine no longer expects much from NATO, the only option left, I'm sorry to say this, but the only option left through which Ukraine can obtain men for the front lines is to orchestrate some sort of operation, which it easily can do because it also has this terrorist organization operating in Romania on its behalf and doing publicly these assassination threats against any dissidents, any people who they ascribed to be enemies of the national interest of Ukraine, and they said that they will commit terrorist attacks if Ukraine loses and so on, and these people are tolerated by our security apparatus. And as a consequence of this, it is in Ukraine's means, it is well within its means, to orchestrate any kind of events, any kind of false flag attacks on the territory of Romania, and to label them as being Russian, or to label them any way they wish, because they carry the whole information infrastructure of Romania, the whole information network, information dissemination network, from news outlets to the national television, national radio, to even the press of the defense ministry. Even they promote these Ukrainian agents and the founders of this terrorist organization operating on the territory of Romania. and they run a network of influencers. These people are believed. The people who contradict them or who somehow are perceived to go against the national interest of Ukraine are shunned and shamed, not to mention threatened, and well, you know the rest. So Ukraine basically now has the capacity to wage whatever kind of operation on the territory of Romania, whatever kind of, not only information operations, because these kinds of things it is already waging, but kinetic ones. So just like it does on the territory of Russia. To have bombs explode, to have all sorts of people killed, to frame it onto somebody else, to frame it on Russia. It's very easy for them to do that, and things have degraded so much that whoever goes out to challenge the official narrative is automatically labeled a Russian agent and a Putin puppet. And well, Romania is essentially a country that can no longer take care of itself, that has a large part of its population weaponized against its national interest, and that has its intelligence services functioning, perhaps through the NATO chain of command, on behalf of a foreign state that does these operations on the territory of Romania. So it is essentially a captured state that can be used for whatever purposes, and what Ukraine lacks most is manpower. So Ukraine can obtain money, it can obtain weapons, but it doesn't have enough soldiers to hold those weapons. And of course it would prefer to have somebody else, not the future of the Ukrainian nation, all the youths of Ukraine dying in those trenches. It would prefer to have some sort of proxy army on its own. Even though it started as a proxy army of the United States and of NATO, it is in its national interest to create its own proxy and to delegate the fighting to some other people on false pretenses, just like they were their will was subverted through the coup d'etat in 2014, and subsequently they were turned into this warring state, contrary to the wishes of the majority of the population that were expressed at the ballots. Similarly, they would like to have such a country, to have a Ukraine of their own, just like the United States, Democrats administrations, and well, Donald Trump's administration did not really do much to reverse the process, but just like the American Democrats engineered Ukraine to be this proxy to fight Russia, Ukraine would like to have a country to fight its war against Russia on Ukrainian territory for it. And Romania is the best candidate. It is the only candidate, so you cannot imagine, you cannot expect to have such a country, because most countries exist as a consequence of the will of their own people, and therefore they are sentient. They have cognitive and moral autonomy. They are like living beings that cater for their own interest. But Romania is not like this. Romania is essentially right now a failed state. It is a captured state, and it is a state that is not defended by its own citizenry. The Romanian citizens do not have the capacity to even understand what's going on, let alone to try to fight it. So, and when you try to explain to them, and it's not exactly rocket science, they make the most surprised faces possible, because they had never thought of it and they had never heard it anywhere. So therefore it must be just something completely insane, right? Something completely unhinged. It's not a possibility in their spectrum of solutions. So they basically ingest whatever the media tells them, and there's no autonomous thinking possible on their behalf. So unless the Romanian media, the mainstream Romanian media, would tell them that Ukraine is actively plotting and actively trying to train us into submission and to use us on the battlefronts, to engineer some sort of conflict between us and Russia in order to bring us on the battle lines, because this is what they need most. They need soldiers. This is seen as some sort of Russian talking point, conspiracy theory, and so on, because, yeah, when the educational system is so abysmal that people leave university, not even school, people leave university without any hope of autonomous thinking, without the possibility of doing their own thinking in any kind of field, to do their own research and to draw their own conclusions, then of course, yeah, they're just a captive audience. And since the media is just engineered to function in the interest of these Western corporations and these Western financial interests and these Western elites, it's kind of like win-win-win that all the parties involved would prefer that Romania, rather than NATO, join Ukraine to fight this war against Russia. Why? In order to ensure Ukraine more favorable negotiating terms. So nobody has any illusion that Romania would turn the tables on the matter, but it would just be a way of prolonging the conflict. Also, I get these very retarded objections all the time, like, oh, but we don't want to fight. Well, guess what? Did the Ukrainians want to fight? If you look at their voting record from, I don't know, say 2000 until today, you will see that they voted pro-Russian most of the times, unless there was a color revolution orchestrated against them or directly a coup. They always voted pro-Russian. So, whereas we voted for a president that was asked specifically to rule out the possibility of sending troops to Ukraine, and he refused. He was in this debate format with a comedian, but his opponent did not show up, so he was the only one there. And he was told to tell the Romanian mothers that their sons will not go to die for Ukraine, and he turned to the camera and he said, I cannot promise that. In order to be a strong nation, we have to do whatever is necessary, blah, 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 blah. So the Romanians knew that this is what they were voting for, as opposed to the other candidate who was definitely against helping Ukraine, so much that he's on all of these assassination lists, declared an enemy of Ukraine, he cannot enter Ukraine, and so on. So it was very obvious that voting for his opponent would have meant that at least there was a good chance that the aid to Ukraine, and by aid I mean this kind of aid, like national sacrifice, both economical and human, would not occur. But yeah, Romanians chose otherwise. As I said, Romania is different from all the other countries. Poland chose Navrotsky, Bulgaria chose Radev, Hungary chose Orban for a long time until it was sanctioned into poverty by the European Union. It was cut off from European Union money, and in the end the Hungarians were persuaded to switch their vote. But all the countries in the region are sentient, and their existence is an expression of the will of the people, whereas Romania is this accident of history. The people do not realize that something like national interest actually exists, and they're just very slavish and meek. And they just want somebody to serve. And that somebody can even be Ukraine. So for the past years, they have been indoctrinated into believing that it is very prestigious to serve Ukraine, that Ukraine is the epitome of civilization, and it is basically this holy calf, this golden calf that needs to be worshipped. And there is a critical mass of people that buy into this, and that see it as a source of their own legitimacy and of their own pride, of their own identity, to be slavish towards the Ukrainians. Given this situation, Ukraine would be a sucker not to profit from it. Of course, Ukraine is not a sucker. The Ukrainian elites are Soviet educated. They are very intelligent. They know how to play chess. They know strategy. So even though they went into this adventure against Russia, which is definitely going wrong and it will never be able to succeed, they can always capitalize on the pool of resources that is adjacent to them. Ukraine has as its southern and western neighbor a territory with human and material resources. It's not a country. If it were a country, it would have acted differently. But this territory is called Romania, and this territory can be profited from to a very great deal because it has no autonomy and because it was trained to worship the entity that subjugates it. So this is why I can see no other solution to the Ukraine predicament, to the fact that they are running out of people, except this of continuing to basically cannibalize Romania, to co-opt and to use the Romanian, eventually the Romanian people as soldiers in their fight. And perhaps they will also be encouraged to compensate themselves for the territorial losses by annexing territory in Romania, just like Stalin did with Poland. So after it annexed the Kresy, the eastern part of Poland that was inhabited by the Eastern Slavs, by the Christian Orthodox and Greek Catholic people of Western Belarus and of Western Ukraine, he took over Silesia and Pomerania from Germany and gave it to Poland. So he basically moved Poland westwards. I'm pretty sure Russia could do that with Ukraine, could encourage Ukraine to come to a settlement by compensating itself from its vassal, from its western vassal Romania. And this is not something that I've read somewhere. This is not something that circulates in Russian propaganda circles. Quite on the contrary, in Russian propaganda circles, the idea circulates that Russia will entice Romania to somehow take back some territories which are now in Ukraine. But why would Russia do that? Romania has always positioned itself, not always, in the past 80 years, with a brief exception of the Soviet occupation between 1944 and 1958. But apart from that period, in the last 100 years, Romania has positioned itself always with hostility towards Russia and towards the Soviet Union. And it was always on a confrontational footing. And it never tried to do some sort of appeasing, some sort of détente, some sort of to reach some sort of understanding, to practice some kind of diplomacy. So Romania is the only country in Southeast Europe that has not tried that, and that has no functioning relationship with Russia. And I'm pretty sure Russia would prefer to help its misguided Eastern Slavic brothers to compensate their losses with Romanian resources, rather than the other way around. Russia does not owe Romania anything because Romania was always hostile. So I'm pretty sure this servitude relationship that exists now between Romania and Ukraine can also go this way, with Ukraine cannibalizing some Romanian territory in order to compensate itself for the losses on the Eastern Front. This being said, this channel that I'm running in English is the only one from a Romanian standpoint discussing the current Romanian realities. And if you follow me from abroad, this should make you wonder why. Because every country has various podcasters in English that try to explain the situation in their country to Western audiences, to foreign audiences, from a domestic point of view. Even countries like Armenia or Georgia have these channels, and they try to engage with these international commentators and to bring them onto their channels. But Romania doesn't. So Romania has a few English language analysts like Sebastian Sas and Emil Cosman, but they do not discuss Romanian matters. They discuss American, British, because these two guys are based in America and Britain respectively. And they just discuss the news in general, the international news. They do not enter on the territory of explaining and analyzing Romania for international audiences. And this, I think, also says a lot regarding the situation that I'm describing, the reason why we are so helplessly bound to this fate, because we do not even understand the ecosystem in which we are operating. So there's nobody to come out and say the Romanian point of view, because they don't actually believe that there is a Romanian point of view. They believe that whatever NATO, whatever the Western mainstream press says, that should be the Romanian point of view, because that represents the Romanian national interests, complete servitude to whatever Western agenda. And also because, as I said, the level of education is not exactly great. So even though there are many diploma holders, there are very few people who can actually use their education to critically assess the kinds of things that they are hearing and to formulate their own opinion. This is a pitfall of the Romanian educational system, unfortunately. So this is what I wanted to tell you. If you like what I do, like, share, subscribe, join my Telegram channel. You'll find it in the channel description. And if you speak Romanian and you'd like to read my texts, join my Substack. You'll find it under the moniker Europa Rediviva as well. And until next time, take care. Bye.